All righty, folks, we're so glad you're with us today. God's blessings to you, and we are excited to have Reverend Michael Meyer with us, Director of LCMS Disaster Training, to talk about disaster response in rural and small town mission. And we're glad to have him and our new assistant here, Sandy Bowers, Deaconess Sandy Bowers, is our new helper. So we're so glad to have her, and you're double dipping now because you help both of us, right? So that works out great today. So we're so glad to have Sandy with us now too. She'll get to be a familiar face. But just a couple of quick housekeeping items. If during the presentation that Pastor Meyer's having, you have any questions for him, there's two options for you. You can go down to the bottom to the chat feature, click on that and type in your question for us, or you can go to the Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on that and type your question in there. Either way, we'll keep track of all the questions, and we'll have a little Q&A time at the end. So also, Sandy will make available to you the opportunity to get the PowerPoint from today's presentation. And if you'd like to use this for any purposes later, it will be in the RSTM archives for our webinar. So just head to LCMS.org/RSTM, and you can find the archive. It takes a few days before it gets uploaded, but it'll be there for you to use as well. So without any further ado, let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day, for the opportunity through technology to bring this webinar to your people. We pray, O Lord, that we know we live in a sin-fallen world and there will be disasters. It is a foregone conclusion. But how we respond as the church, reaching out to those who are in need and sharing both mercy work as well as sharing the gospel makes all the difference in the world. We pray your blessing be upon our time today, that it might be fruitful for the work that you have given us to do, and that it might give us ideas that we might further the abilities that we have to reach out to those around us with your gospel word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All righty, Michael, take it away.
Amen. Thanks, Todd. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys today and to share a little bit about what LCMS Disaster Response and Training does and looks like, and how it can be integrated with you guys out in the field and rural small town ministry work. So just real briefly, as I'm working to share my screen here, let's see. Just as a way of introduction, as Todd says, I'm the Director of Disaster Training for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We do have 2-3 others working in disaster response work for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We have a Director of Disaster Response. That would be the Reverend Dr. Ross Johnson. We have a Alert Volunteer Manager. That would be Reverend Rob Wurst. And then Sandy Bowers here, who is also assisting Todd with the RSTM work. She also worked with us. I would think a majority of her time is spent with disaster response and doing some of the things. So you have multiple individuals who can provide guidance and counsel should you need some or have any questions. So just kind of to get going, I know that one of the tasks that I was assigned to talk about today was our flood bucket program within the LCMS, within our Lutheran early response teams. And rather than simply spend an hour talking about flood buckets, I thought it best to include that conversation in the larger picture of disaster response and the training side of things. So where does it fit in the overall work of the church? Because flood buckets, it's a small portion of what we do. It is a portion. It's a good and worthy and worthwhile thing to do. But it's healthy also and good to know where it fits into the overall picture of things as it relates to our work together. So we do need to lay some groundwork and some basis for that. We always distinguish what a disaster is. We generally put these and categorize them as things that occur that are outside of the control of the affected individual, right? And it's impactful to them, right? It's a critical event. It's something that that results in great harm, suffering, destruction, and damage. And we break them up into two categories: natural disasters and human-caused or man-made disasters. I'd say that just about any natural disaster, LCMS disaster response is active and willing, at least, to be an active partner to congregations and districts as they reach out to communities impacted by those things. Human-caused disasters is a much bigger pot, a much bigger cornucopia of things that could potentially happen. We generally will engage when there's a failure of something that man has made, right? So an explosion or a collapse of a structure, fires, those kinds of things. When we start looking at a larger scale humanitarian crisis, or for example, dealing with refugees from Ukraine, because of the war now of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, when we're dealing with those refugees, we might be engaged, but we're not primary individuals who would be working with that. We would partner with our regional directors and missionaries in the Office of International Mission and partner churches and those kinds of things. And so we might lend expertise and whatnot, but it doesn't fall into the main category of what we talk about and respond to as disaster response. There are different scales of disasters. If you have a house fire, that's a disaster to you. That's a disaster for you and your family, and for all those that have to pick up the pieces for that. With that said, that doesn't impact the larger community in the same way as maybe a tornado would or a hurricane would. We'll still help congregations respond to it, and we encourage congregations, even if they don't engage us, to show love and mercy and compassion to their brother and sister who may be going through an individual or family crisis like that. But then these things scale up all the way into what we would consider what we would call presidentially declared disasters. They require emergency relief efforts beyond the ability of local communities and local groups to respond to. Really, this is a definition that's set by the United States government as far as the presidentially declared disasters. It really means that there's a financial bar that's met as it relates to the amount of destruction that a disaster caused. So there's really not a lot of gray area. A president on one side of the aisle can't deny assistance to states that would be on the other side of the political aisle just because they don't like them. If the application shows that the financial bar for destruction has been met, the president is obligated to declare it a disaster, and federal funds and FEMA and those national groups step in and provide aid and assistance. Catastrophic disasters generally go across state lines, right? So think Hurricane Katrina, I guess that'd be 17 years ago now, or if you want to be more recent, Hurricane Ida would be just last year, or the tornadoes that we had in December and January that went across Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, Tennessee. Some of the a number of different states were all hit by tornadoes right before Christmas. These would be considered catastrophic. They're larger in scope. They're broad and far-reaching, and during these times, local churches and their schools have an opportunity to minister to those in need, to care for people in their bodies and their souls. If you were to attend one of our volunteer trainings, and we'll talk about what that actually is as we go through the rest of our time here today, but you would see that the response of the church is focused on the unique things that we can bring compared to other organizations. Okay. So in other words, while some groups like the Red Cross might be good at maybe providing a shelter or a resource center for people to go to and find where things are, what they don't do is pray with people. What they don't do is proclaim the gospel to those people that are hurting. And this is something that is very unique to the church, something that we can bring. And frankly, we are called to bring it in these times, to love and show mercy to the neighbor. And this work, of course, flows from the altars and those places where God's word is preached and proclaimed and the sacraments are administered on a regular basis, that God's mercy flows through those kind of as conduits for then our members then to show love and mercy to the neighbor. Some things, just as a general way of talking, LCMS Disaster Response provides guidance and direction to districts, congregations, and recognized service organizations through a variety of ways. We'll provide on-site needs assessment. This is not somebody from the synodical office coming in and saying, well, your wall's cracked there, that's going to need to be replaced, that's going to need to be done. This is simply gathering with the leaders of the impacted congregation, saying, what extent have your members been impacted? Has the community been impacted? What are the current resources that are available to them? And what are some things that we can do together as the church to reach out and show love to the neighbor? And that leads into the development of an action plan. So after we provide that assessment, what are the needs, what are the resources, what happened, what's being done, and where can we fit into this picture? Again, as the church. Sometimes congregations be encouraged to maybe provide and do more than what they otherwise would be thinking about doing on their own. And we're able to do that through the distribution of emergency relief and disaster recovery grants. In a normal year, this is about $1.5 to $2 million in grants that LCMS Disaster Response provides to congregations and districts and RSOs to do the work of the ministry, to show love to the neighbor. This can range from coordinating volunteers, providing food, buying drywall for rebuilding, all other kinds of things, to providing aftercare for emergency service personnel and other kinds of things. All that can be done through this grant process. We also provide training in congregation preparedness and Lutheran early response teams. That's our volunteer system, where people who want to give of their time and their talents with their hands and their feet, their energy, their efforts, their skills, we have an avenue and a way that we can work together to do that for the most amount of impact. And I'll spend a little more time talking about that further on in our time. We can provide pastoral care for professional church workers and church members too. A lot of times this might be through a disaster response chaplain. The congregation-based disaster response is how we operate. LCMS Disaster Response is never going to go in to an area and just say, the LCMS is here, the IC is here, the Synod is here, we're going to do good things. But we're always working through local congregations to lift them up in their different communities. It also means that we don't duplicate things that other groups are already doing. So the Red Cross is bringing water. We're not going to bring water to a disaster response. We're going to do something else. And we're going to focus on the unique work and call of the church, which is showing and proclaiming Christ's love. We also are able to draw then on the local strengths and weaknesses, or we don't draw on the weaknesses, but we'll try and strengthen the weaknesses of local congregations, right? Because every congregation is different. They've got different strengths and weaknesses, and how can we leverage those and utilize those in the response? That's a part of what takes place in that assessment that may be engaged or may be done on behalf of the synodical office with the congregation. We always talk about ways to help other communities. So if something doesn't happen in your community, but happens, the next community over, or 100 miles away, or 500 miles away, we like to give some guidance for congregations on how they can best help, because everyone's moved when they hear about something that's happened. They want to help, they want to give, they want to be a part of a response. A number of years ago, the United States, the federal government, put together a steering committee made up of a number of different organizations. The LCMS, we had an individual sit on this steering committee to help shape and guide the conversation. And they came up with 6 or 7 basic points or guidelines for how individuals or groups can help others after disaster happens. And here's what they came up with. That financial contributions are often the best kind of donation to make. They're not the only kind, but it allows for a little bit of flexibility on the receiving end for those that are in need of that assistance. It's very easy to ship financial contributions rather than saying, well, we want to send $5,000 worth of drywall down to Houston after Hurricane Harvey. Well, sending $5,000 and letting them buy the drywall down there may be a much more effective way to go about doing things. It stimulates the local economy that's been impacted directly by the disaster, so that it's good for the people there to purchase things locally if possible. That's not always possible, but when it is, we like to do that. And then they came up with a number of others. Used clothing is rarely a useful item to collect for disaster relief. This, may be surprising for some people, but it's hard to gather, it's hard to collect, it's hard to sort, it's hard to distribute. It takes up a lot of space. It takes precious volunteer hours to sort through these things. And if instead we were to give a gift card to a family to buy what they need for their clothing or whatever it is, it gives them a little bit of dignity to pick something out that is exactly what they need, rather than digging through piles of used clothing. Now, there are times where it can be helpful when people have coat drives all the time, or quilt drives. Those are very helpful. But used clothing is rarely useful. Another guideline they came up with was that individuals and groups need to confirm the need before beginning a collection of donated goods. I promise this is leading into the flood buckets. Okay, so the last thing that we need in a disaster is to receive a lot of things that's not actually needed in the disaster. So that receiving organization does not have to sift through what is helpful and what is not. So if this is taking place beforehand, before the collection begins, you're able to be very responsive to the actual needs on the ground, and the gifts that you are able to give are then used. And that's ultimately what we're looking for, is for that to happen and for the people there to be served. It's good to donate through an organization rather than directly to individuals. It's good to go through an organization. There's tax benefits to that, to donate through an organization. It's good to know who the organization is that you're donating through, though. Not all organizations are created equal. Ask questions, call them, ask them if they're willing to share the financials of their organization on how much the gifts are being used for overhead, how much is actually getting to the people who are being helped. If you were to go to lcms.org/disaster, on the right-hand side of the page, you'd find a financial statement from LCMS Disaster Response to show exactly the breakdown for how funds are used in disaster response, what part is used for the overhead, what part is used for grants, what part is used for equipment, what part is used for other things like that. So that'd be a helpful thing to do. And of course, I'm going to tout LCMS Disaster Response, but just do your research, okay? Also, transportation should be planned in advance. This was, I think, point number 5 or 6 that the steering committee came up with. And here in the back of the bed of this pickup truck, you'll see flood buckets. And these were ones that were put together for flooding in Illinois a number of years ago. But the idea is that if you start putting together a collection of goods or putting together flood buckets, that you plan, how are you going to get these things to the people who need them? That needs to take place on the very front end as part of that strategic planning for the best way to go about doing some of these things. let me see. Donated goods should be well packed and labeled. Again, we have some flood buckets here, and we're going to see as we talk about that a little bit more that there's ways that you can make it very, very clear what's going into the package or box that you've donated, so that people don't have to, the receiving organization doesn't have to sift through it all, figure out, and open up all the boxes. All right, what's in this box? What's in this box? That takes up a lot of time. So if you can label the outside, what is this? It will be received with greater joy than if you had not done these things. And finally, the last point that they came up with is that volunteers are encouraged to affiliate with an agency involved in disaster response and recovery. I think you'll see as we can finish out our hour here, that this is exactly what LCMS Disaster Response is and does. We're an agency that you can engage and be affiliated with in this disaster response and recovery, so that our relief efforts are coordinated and not haphazard. We're not spontaneous volunteers that would get in the way and become a second disaster to the disaster by gumming up the works, but we're doing things coordinated and efficient. So moving on, let's talk about these flood buckets. Just before we actually get into it, though, I want to talk about the general use of flood buckets. Obviously, they're only used in times of flood. You wouldn't give a flood bucket to a tornado victim. Now, you could put together different kinds of kits if you were so inclined that would go with homeowners who were impacted by different kinds of disasters. That is certainly possible. But this the next few minutes, we're going to be talking very particularly about the flood buckets. And in putting together and starting this program in your church, in your congregation, people are key. And what I mean by that is you need somebody, a leader. So you don't need to have 50 people in your congregation who are all willing to put together flood buckets. If you have 2 or 3 or 4, that's sufficient. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there Jesus is among them. Well, where 2 or 3 people are gathered to do this, it's possible to put together flood buckets. You need someone to organize and purchase supplies. So the organization is outside of the purchasing of those supplies and having them delivered to the church or picking them up and dropping them off at the church. It's saying, we're going to meet on Saturday from 2 to 4. Everybody wants to come help, you all come. Okay. That this person is in charge of that kind of coordination. But you need somebody to do that. And frankly, the pastor's got a lot of stuff on his plate. So if you could have it be somebody other than the pastor, that would be ideal. It's important that the flood buckets are packed and labeled well. It's on one hand, it's easy because all of the things that go in the flood bucket program actually fit inside the 5-gallon bucket. And yet at the same time, it might be easy to forget that we should put a label on it. Well, we provide labels. If you want to contact us, send us an email, disaster@lcms.org. Say, we're putting together, 10, 15 flood buckets. We're putting together 500 flood buckets. We'll say, great, let's get you some labels. We'll ship them. We'll print them. We'll ship them to you. And that way you'd be able to put a full-size label on it that says LCMS Disaster Response Flood Bucket. And you could, if you want to put your own church's information on there too, that's fine. We've seen that quite a bit. But you need people there to then pack these things. So you get all the supplies from the store, you bring them, set them out on tables at the church. It's pretty easy for 5 people to go through and make 50 flood buckets in an hour or even less, because it's such a simple and easy thing for people to walk around the table and put things in the bucket at the same time. But then you also need somebody to transport and distribute. And this is probably the most complicated part of the flood bucket program as we do it in the LCMS. Not always the transportation. That sometimes is very easy. Someone with a pickup truck is willing to take 20, or you have a little trailer and you can get 150 or 300 buckets into a trailer. And then this should be coordinated in such a way, though, that you're not simply dropping flood buckets off at the door of a church or or whatnot. But you're coordinating it and getting it to people that need it. And if it's your community, this is even easier than to distribute, because you simply let people know. I know small towns, and there's no secrets in small towns. So if you have these things going on, you tell a couple of people, next thing you know, the whole community is going to know that these things are available for pickup at the church, and people will come by and they'll pick them up, and it becomes quite easy then. The other option is to simply put them in the back of a pickup truck and drive through the community in the neighborhood and hand them out. Now, there's a challenge to that, because what is lost there is the fact that we recognize that flood buckets should not be the only response that a congregation engages in. Now, theoretically, it could be. A congregation could say, we want to hand these out, and then it should be done. But we would actually like to encourage our congregations to use this as an opportunity to build relationships with individuals in the community who have been impacted, to then down the road find additional ways to engage them, whether that's through sending volunteers their way to help them clean up their homes, or whether that's by giving them welcome home gifts when they get back into their home after it's been flooded out and now repaired, and simply communicating with them and inviting them to church. It's never a requirement that people come to church in order to receive assistance from our teams, but it's very common for our teams to get that word out. When is the church service? You're welcome to join us, receive God's gifts with us together. We'd be happy to have you join us. The flood buckets themselves, here you see a picture of the flood relief label that we would put and send for you. It's just a 8.5 by 11 inch sticker that you would peel and then stick on the side of a 5-gallon bucket. The bucket and everything that goes with it and in it is roughly about $30, depending on some changes from region to region as far as the overall cost of that. I would encourage your congregation to look at alternate ways and unique ways of funding this. You can use Thrivent Action Team grants. I know that those aren't generally very large; they're only maybe $250, but you can use that. You could use a couple of them for the same project, in the sense of, well, you're using some to buy some supplies to multiply maybe some of the donations that you've already had to do that. And then you're maybe using another Thrive in Action Team grant to help feed the volunteers who are putting them together. And maybe you're using another one to help transport and pay the fuel expenses for the person who is driving them and delivering them. So that's a very good way to help multiply the resources that we have at the congregational level. You can also talk with the store manager where you're purchasing these and talk about bulk pricing. Tell them that you need 15 or 20 or 50 of these things put together, and the list of everything that would go into it. And they may be willing to work with you on price. They may be even willing to donate a lot of these things if you explain to them what this is for, that these are cleaning supplies that are going to be distributed to individuals after floods for them to help clean up their homes. And companies generally are looking for ways to make charitable donations, even as a corporate entity, that the congregation can take advantage of and partner with in that regard. And then again, we've talked about this as it related to the National Steering Committee guidelines. Label things clearly. In this case, you see that both that it's a flood bucket, but this particular group with the Florida Georgia District put together another sticker of their own that has a list of the items that are in it. That's fantastic, because then nobody has to open that up to know what's in it. They know that it has paper towels, rags, cleaner, glass cleaner, cleansing powder, bleach, scrub brush, rubber glove, sponge. They know that all of those things are in that bucket, and they don't have to open it up and figure out what else might be in there. As far as what goes in there, we do provide this list of items. So each flood bucket contains a devotional guide. Now we used to use what's pictured in this the top picture. Where is God now? It was a devotional guide that we put together with Concordia Publishing House, and it's kind of modeled after Portals of Prayer. Concordia Publishing House owns that, and they don't print it as often as we as we would like them to. So we developed a different one. It's called a 40-day devotional guide, and it's kind of like a Portals of Prayer, only it's a little meatier. It has the scripture written out in the devotional guide itself. It has a hymn verse written out. It has a prayer written out, and then everything takes a couple of pages. It's a little bigger, but if somebody's lost everything, they don't have to go find their hymnal now or go find a Bible in order to read through a devotion. They can just open up this little pocket guide, and there it is. We put that in all of our flood buckets, and we will send those out to you free of charge. Let us know. Again, you're putting together 10, 20, 500 of them. We'll send you out one for every single one of those buckets. They also include everything on the list here, except the optional one on the very bottom, the broom or the mop. Part of the reason that's optional is because that doesn't actually fit in the bucket. But if your group and congregation is interested in doing this and wants to give with the bucket a broom, you're more than welcome to do that. And you can just store them separately. Now the bucket itself is a tool, right? It's not just you empty it out and throw the bucket away. But if somebody's house is flooded, and this is really one of the worst disasters that could happen to somebody. In fact, personally, if I had to choose between a fire, tornado, and a flood, the flood would be last on my list of things I'd want to go through. So just because it's so dirty and yucky, and there's we call the flood response, we call it muck out, because it's the mixture of the mud and the yuck that comes up out of the drain and the sewer system and backs up into the house at the same time. So it's never ever clean. With that said, the bucket can be used. You fill it up with muck from the inside of the house, and you can carry it out and dump it out. Okay, so that's kind of where it gets some usefulness and where mucking gets its name. By the way, just for the sake of everybody's conscience, we did contact the manufacturers of these cleaning agents, and they did say that factory sealed that these could all be placed in the same bucket safely. So there's no concern as long as they're sealed from the factory still. They're perfectly safe to store inside the buckets. Now, as we talk about storage, just like with transportation, storage is one of the more challenging things. The flood buckets do not get distributed before a disaster. You don't go to somebody's home and say, I think your house is going to flood, so here's a bucket to help you clean up when it does. This is something that's distributed after something has happened, after the flood has gone through. And so at the same time, the window of opportunity that when these things are needed is pretty small too. It's very impactful, but it needs to be early on in their response. So because of that, they do need to be put together beforehand, but not distributed until after. So but in the in-between time, you have to figure out a way to store them. If you're only doing 10 or 15, they can be stored in a broom closet. They stack real easy. It's not that big of a deal. But if you want to get into 100 or 200, then you're looking at trying to figure out as a group and a congregation, where do we put these things? I've yet to go to a church that doesn't have any space for something like this. But determining where that space is on the front end is very helpful, and having those conversations within the leadership of your congregation would be helpful. And along with that, storage can be coordinated. This is not something that congregations are in it alone, but we can work together for this, and work perhaps at the circuit level and the district level to talk about where these things might best be staged. And generally, that would be close to a flood-prone area. So those areas that have maybe been through numerous floods in the past, you know that with relative consistency that the community is going to be impacted again. That might be a place where you might want to stage some of these, not in the area that actually has flooded again, but in an area close by. So work with your circuit brothers, work with the other congregations in the circuits to identify some of these places, and maybe a congregation who's willing to store on behalf of the rest of the circuit, and then make available, of course, relatively quickly after something has happened. We do have other projects in disaster response. I already mentioned that you could do some survival kits or different kinds of, instead of flood buckets, do different things that could be distributed before disaster that could be useful or after different kinds of disasters. We also have survival kits, and I could get you information on that if you're interested. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but it's a similar concept to the flood bucket. I do want to talk about the fact that these flood buckets begin the conversation with families who have been impacted by a flood. It's not the end of that conversation, as if we can now go home and sleep well at night because, well, we did everything we could. No, well, I think there's more that we can and should be doing. And a part of that is our Lutheran early response team. We have in the LCMS about 20,000 volunteers who have been through this particular training. We have records on just over 6,000 of them for first 15 years or so since or after Katrina. Good records simply weren't being kept, but about 4 years ago we started taking a lot better records, and now we have a software tracking system that we can track and manage all of these volunteers. Regardless, alert training is intended to provide the minimum training necessary to meet FEMA guidelines for faith-based volunteers. We're not first responders. That's not the goal of early response team. But get in and help and show love and compassion of a neighbor, build the capacity for local congregations. So maybe your congregation is impacted. Well, your community might be small. You might not have a lot of volunteers that's in your congregation that can come and help, but maybe you could have several dozen come from across the rest of the district, or maybe you could have 100 or 200 that could come over the course of several weeks. And we can work with you to make sure that happens in an orderly fashion. So these volunteers deploy in a coordinated way in the name of local LCMS congregations. So again, not doing the work in the name of their own congregation, but in the name of your congregation. Mercy, showing mercy, which is physical and spiritual care for body and soul. We ask our alert teams to be self-supporting and self-sustaining so that when they come into your community or you go into somebody else's community, that you're not going in to help, but then at the same time saying, well, help me help you. That's not how we work in the church and how we work with our volunteer teams like this. So that everything that we do is a gift to that local congregation and community. We recently opened up the alert volunteer system to youth aged 14 and older. We did this for a number of reasons. Not just because they have strong backs and are energetic and that kind of thing, but we did this so that we can connect connect the different generations that we have within our church with each other. And I'm confident that if we're connecting our high schoolers in a program that lets them work in this way alongside retired members in the congregation, that they're going to be more likely to stick around in that congregation when they go through college and they come back. They're going to look for other alert teams where they can volunteer, and they're going to be better equipped and prepared to communicate with people of multiple generations. And maybe we'll hang on to a few more of these youth than we otherwise would have. So with that said, we've opened this up to the youth ages 14 and older to do a lot of things in disaster response with our alert teams. They can't do everything because of liability reasons. We want them to be safe, so they're not permitted to work in hazardous environments or with chainsaws. But there are a lot of ways in which they can help. Because of this, we've instituted background checks for all of our volunteers. that work with youth, that work inside homes, that work with and handling personal items, because we want to be able to go to homeowners and tell them that not only have our volunteers been trained, but they've gone through background checks, and that we have the highest possible quality of volunteer that's going to be working with them and for them, and handling their personal items. So that background check is integrated with our software platform, and it's not for the sake of the person going through the volunteer check, but it's for the sake of the neighbor, for frankly the other volunteers who you may be volunteering next to them and you don't know them, but you do know that they've been through the same training, they've been through a similar check. We have some specialized training. I'm kind of flying through some of this stuff now because I do want to give some time, even if it's just a couple of minutes at the end for questions. But we have some specialized training. This would be, we have a chainsaw safety and use manual. We have trainers that have been identified in a number of districts, and a pathway for additional trainers to be raised up in districts. But this is to really provide a unique service after wind events, whether it's a tornado or a hurricane, as an aspect, one part of what it is that we do with our overall alert volunteer system. Okay, and so we have a safety program that meets very, very high standards, and our trainers are all highly and very qualified. And if you have any questions on that, we'd be happy to talk with you about it further. For those of you who might be asking and wondering, how is it that we get engaged? How do we learn what the LCMS is doing? Where are our people? Where's our training and all that other stuff? This is it. LCMS-alerts. Oh, and there's a typo. It should be .org. That's what I get for typing this really fast 30 minutes ago. So LCMS-alert.org. Okay, you can see it in the search bar of this slide. But this is where all of our volunteer relief efforts and all of our training is scheduled and deployed from. You create an account here, you sign up. If you already have an account, you can log in, and when you do, you see a couple of different things. Right here, this would be called my volunteer dashboard. I get to see where all the places are that I've volunteered my time or participated in training or done whatever, and you can see that there's the number of hours that you personally have volunteered, how many training and deployment responses that would be. You can see the impact value of, now the impact value is determined by FEMA. That we don't put a number on that. Those aren't, don't expect a check in the mail for that amount or anything like that, because our volunteers are volunteers. They do that. They volunteer of their time and their talent, and they do so willingly, and we are grateful for that. But this is the value that FEMA places on a single volunteer hour in a disaster, and they rate that at, I think, $23 and some odd cents an hour. So if all the volunteers come in and they kept track of all that, they would be able to then say, well, we had this many volunteers doing this much effort and this much work. A lot of specialized volunteers can actually save homeowners far more than that. Again, going back to the chainsaw volunteers, you may save homeowners tens of thousands of dollars based on having somebody come and clean up those downed trees that are on the house or whatnot. So not only do you see the snapshot of what you yourself have done in the system, but you can also see all of the trainings and deployments that are currently scheduled in the system. I took this snapshot yesterday, and you can see that we've got trainings and deployments scheduled from Florida to Nebraska, Wisconsin, down into Texas, and a number here in the Missouri, Illinois area. So if you just click on one of these dots when you're on the website, it'll bring up the information on it, and it'll ask you, and it'll tell you how you can sign up for it. Occasionally, there's one that you won't be able to sign up for. It'll say private. But if you have a question about that, send us an email. Say, hey, why is this private? Why can't I be a part of this? And we can have a pretty decent answer for you, I think. But this is where all of our, all of the deployments, all of our training is being run through this system. It does the background checks automatically. It keeps track of things, and we can send out notices, and you get automatic emails if something is happening in your district or a district that you have scanned and follow. you'll get an automatic email when something new is scheduled. So you want to know what's going on in the Kansas district, and them, and every time they schedule something, you get the email for it. It's fantastic. And then we can also identify specialty areas as well. You can go in and edit your profile to say that you're interested in volunteering for food and doing that kind of stuff, or childcare, or you're an electrician or a plumber, and those. So you can click those things, and we can search later and send messages to niche groups and say, hey, we really need somebody that has your skill set at this time over here. So it's a wonderful, wonderful tool for us. For those of you who are wondering, how can my congregation get a training? How can my congregation do something like that? We have an online deployment form that is available in the software system. So if you through LCMS-alert.org, you can fill this out, and your DDRC will receive a copy of it that you'd like to either create you're requesting a training at your congregation, or your team is actually going out and doing something, and you want to spend and note that you're going to spend 4, 5, 6 hours cleaning up Grandma Smith's yard on a Saturday afternoon, and you'd like to keep track of it in the system, or you'd like to invite other congregations or those kinds of things. This is a perfect way to connect with your DDRC. Okay, DDRC is District Disaster Response Coordinator. Every district has one. They're the ones that oversees those response efforts in each of the districts. Some of them are volunteers, do it on a volunteer basis. Others are district staff members that have taken it on as part of their regular responsibilities and duties. We do have some potential grant opportunities, and this would be kind of outside of a disaster. I already mentioned early on things that we do in the middle of a disaster or in response to a disaster. But we do have some other limited training grants that are available. We've really tried the last year and a half or so, and in the near future, to provide the entire alert training to circuit visitor groups in the district. So like a gathering of all of the circuit visitors. So not just 2 or 3 or 4 of them, but all of the circuit visitors in a district. And we've done this in Florida, Georgia, Wisconsin, the 2 Wisconsin districts. We've done this in the Pacific Southwest district. We're scheduled to do it in Southern Illinois and the Mid-South district, to gather all of the circuit visitors together with the district staff, and to go through the trainings, talk strategically about how we function and work together and how we can do it best in that particular district. So that's something that we're helping fund through some grants. We can also provide some grants for some specialized training events. Last year, we had the first ever LCMS chainsaw games. It's a kind of a fun event that we put together so that we brought together our trainers and kind of unrolled or unveiled our new chainsaw curriculum with them, so that in a competitive but friendly environment, we were able to work together, hone some skills, and get to know each other. We'd love for those kinds of things to be happening in the different districts, as well as regional disaster workshops that districts can come together and partner and say, we'd love to put together on a workshop that's beyond alert training, but just how to drywall, how to do something else, how to engage youth, and those kinds of things. So we want to help support that in the districts. So if your districts aren't doing these things, encourage your DDRC in that, and I think they'd be more than happy to help work with you with that. And we also want to give some limited alert trailer grants for new groups that want to engage at a high level within the alert program. So if your group has never been involved with alert, but you think you have 7 or 8 individuals that want to get together and will actively do this, give us a call, and we'd love to work with you about it. We don't give the whole the grant to cover the entire purchase of it, but we'll generally do a matching kind of grant. So that if you're looking to spend $10,000 or even $5,000 on a trailer and some equipment, we can help with half for a good number of that. So with that said, that was a whirlwind of a presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have now?
Well, first of all, thank you, Pastor Meyer, for a wealth of information. Folks, again, you can get the PowerPoint. We'll send you a PDF of that PowerPoint. If you'd like that, just let Sandy know. You can email her. I tell you what, Sandy has done a fantastic job of answering questions while you were going. So she's answered a couple questions on the chat feature, as well as questions on the Q&A feature, how to get involved and the best way to get involved through that link, the Alert Volunteer site there. That's available, and we also threw that into the chat feature if you want to copy that, folks. That's right there for you. Also, how to get involved, who invites you to disaster. Again, through that district disaster response coordinator, that information is there as well. So we want to make sure you take advantage of the information that is there. Looks like Sandy just put up her email, so if you want a copy of that PowerPoint, you can get it there. You still have a few minutes here to ask some more questions of Pastor Meyer while we've got him on. Just a couple of things that I maybe found particularly helpful. The connection to Word and especially Word and Sacrament ministry, I think sometimes that's something we forget. That's part of mercy work. It's not just doing the muck out, but it's connecting that into the local congregation and things of that nature. How do you guys help congregations perhaps make that leap, because you get so bogged down in trying to do the disaster relief part? How do you help bridge the gap over there to Word and Sacrament?
Yeah, and I think a corollary to that is the danger, or not the danger, the worry, the concern that some congregations might have. They say, we don't want to engage because it's going to overshadow our work as a congregation, or we'll get pushed out and it'll be somebody else getting credit while we're just kind of being trampled on. Well, we try really hard to not let those things happen. As a part of that assessment, the on-site assessment, now a lot of disasters don't require somebody from our office to actually go and be on the ground and meet with folks. But sometimes when it's large enough, we will go there, and we'll do that a number of times every year. Where we find ourselves deploying and visiting with leaders in the congregation and trying to answer the question that you just have. Step one is we want to make sure that we put into place a situation where the pastor is not the one leading the whole response. If we're able to keep the pastor free of that, not push him away, but free from the oversight responsibility of the day-to-day goings on, he can then provide pastoral care in the context of that disaster. So whether it's going with and accompanying volunteers as they go to clean up somebody's house, the pastor can go with. Our alert teams also, if you go through the whole alert training, we have different team members that we have. So there's a leader, there's an equipment manager, there's those kinds, but then there's also a devotional leader, a spiritual care guy or girl who can make sure that the volunteers are praying, that they're shaping everything that they do centered around the Word of God from the beginning of the day to the end, and also willing to stay and pray with family members, to talk with them, hear the story. Not every family wants to be prayed with. They're all willing to talk about what's happening to them. And so when you go through the alert training, we do spend a lot of time talking about this, that the response, even though there's so many things that should and can be done for these people, the primary reason we're there is actually simply to show the love of Christ for them. And if that means that we listen and maybe we don't actually do anything for the first hour, because we're talking with that homeowner and sharing, and that's okay, because they need to go through that and they need a chance to talk about it. So this is in a singular way, that's how we can help with that. In a larger, broader way, as a part of our grant process, it's not unusual for us to include funds in a grant to have a site coordinator paid on site when it's a large volunteer response, right? And what that does is that it takes the local congregation where they can can see and support what's happening there. They don't get bogged down in it, so that they can then engage their community in a very different way. So the site coordinator then does all the nitty-gritty stuff of doing site assessments for, going out and finding people who have been impacted, what kind of work do they need done, and then connecting volunteers with the right skill set to the right amount, the right work. So that generally is done through a site coordinator for those volunteers. Again, so that the nitty-gritty is done not by the local pastor or the elders or the spiritual care team, but then it's a corollary of that. It moves alongside of it. Does that make sense, Todd?
Yeah, that's excellent. Very, very good. Thank you for that. And I think you mentioned a couple things. Listening, that's always key. And number two, praying with folks. I've been out on several disaster response opportunities, and I have yet to have anybody turn me down when I say, may I pray with you before we leave? You just have to be bold enough to ask, but they definitely, like I said, I've never been turned down, which is pretty awesome.
I've never been turned down for that either. I have been not turned down, but I've been asked by a family to not have the staff photographer take pictures. I have had somebody do that.
I can get that.
Said,
yeah.
Don't pray with me. I've always been, yes, please.
Yep.
We'd love that. And
yes,
it doesn't
please.
matter what church they're from. We're going to go and we're going to help. And we're going to communicate and stay in contact with them afterwards, because that relationship then that is so important to sharing the gospel later on. We're able to then do that. And maybe the Lord plants a seed there and allows somebody else to water. And then there's growth.
Yep. Okay, Stuart has a question here. He says, how does a local congregation disaster watch person track needs and then pass that on to the members via bulletins, etc.? What are some good tips for that?
Yeah, so this is I assume this is, there's two ways that I see this going. One is where the local person, where it has happened, that person is going to attend. There's a what do they call a Red Cross Mark Center? MA, and it's a resource center essentially, and there's generally daily briefings that to the public that says these are the things that are needed now, or people that are still missing, or there's this many people without power still, or these kinds of things. So there's daily briefings for those. So when in a locale that has had a disaster, they'll have those daily meetings and briefings. And so sometimes it's just by word of mouth. You're interacting with people and they say, this is what I need. And you say, there it is. We'll share that with our congregation and community. Now, if you're not in that locale, what you can do is pay attention to our Facebook page. LCMS Disaster Response is the key word for our Facebook page, and we'll push notifications out there that says these kinds of things, or equipment or whatever is needed now, and who you can contact at the DDRC, right? And then with our volunteer software program now, we have an announcement system that we're able to hopefully use in the near future, where we can send out those regular updates to people who aren't in the area, to say these are the kinds of things that are needed in this particular response at this time.
And that system has been extremely helpful, even just personally, when I signed up for that and got my name on there. You get emails. Maybe it's something you can help with. Maybe it's something you can't. You dismiss the ones you can't, but maybe you can jump in somewhere else. That's super helpful, because otherwise I would have never known any of those things were going on. So I personally found it to be extremely helpful. Great story from Bryce. He was talking about a congregation outside of St. Louis that he helped with mucking out several years ago from a disaster. He said, just trying to get here, second year in a row they'd had flooding. They'd done a great job of following through with those that they had assisted the year before. They shared that they had 6 baptisms that winter from the area that they had assisted prior. So he said, I don't know the extent of their follow-up, but definitely the Holy Spirit was working through the doors that were open. Yeah. It's just an opportunity to share and like you said, develop those relationships, because you never know where that can go. Again, Stuart asks, are they, I'm assuming these needs, are they daily posted on, or any specific time or day?
No, not by us currently. If we put something up in the software system as an announcement, we'll keep it updated. When something is no longer needed, it'll come down and it wouldn't be on the list anymore. So in that regard, it's a living document. It's responsive to the current needs. Like I said, if you're local there and it's your community that's been impacted, they'll do daily briefings. Sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's in the evening, but it's pretty easy to do that. And if you want to know when it would be for your community, I mean, you can. Every county has a designated county emergency management officer that's an employee of the county, depending on the size of the county. If it's a large county, they may have a dedicated person that's all they do. But if it's a smaller county with a smaller population, they might just be somebody else that will be putting on an additional hat when something happens. But regardless, you can talk to them and connect with them and say, what's going on? What in our county we'd like to engage, and how can we ask some of those questions to get some of that information if something happens?
Well, I think that brings up a good point that you brought up earlier, and that's being proactive. If you proactively say you have an alert team, or even if you don't, you just have a group of volunteers that desire to help, you can get out and you talk to your local police chief, your local sheriff, the disaster response person in the county. Do that ahead of time. And then they already know that you're interested in helping. So who are they going to go to when there's a need? They're going to go to the guys who already said they're willing to volunteer. So I think
and
that
you can also ask them what other groups are already doing, or already maybe another group. There's already Red Cross shelters that have been established. They don't need that. And you can start to identify as a congregation ways and say, all right, they said that these things have already been taken care of. What's left? What are things that we can now turn our focus to on in that preparation for hopefully what never happens,
yeah.
But can turn our preparation then to something that might be needed afterwards. And the whole alert system, what we're moving in our big push this next 12 to 18 months is to move into the idea and understanding that our volunteers, our alert teams, this is not just something that we should be doing in a disaster and waiting for disasters to happen, just kind of sitting around watching the news. No, I mean, there's people in your community that need help and assistance today. How can we identify them today and help them today or tomorrow? Not waiting for what may happen or may not happen, but identifying those people today as a church and saying, we love you, we care for you, we want to help you in this thing. And by the way, Jesus loves you too.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, local fire, local whatever. Yeah, that happens all the time. Yeah. All righty. Well, folks, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Pastor Meyer, for all the information. I know that you will make yourself available. If anybody has any further questions, please feel free to contact him. Get on that website, lcms.org/disaster relief, or get a hold of Deaconess Bauer. She's there. She's answered most of the questions today already. So that went great. Looks like our next webinar will be preparing your grad for the next step. We have Marcus Zill. Pastor Zill he does all sorts of work on campus ministry, so he'll be with us on May 19th to talk about the next grad. Looks like graduations are right around the corner, so that's hard to believe. It's already time for graduations. I think the school year just started about 5 minutes ago. So, but it is time. So thanks be to God for all the resources we can give. If you need any further information, don't hesitate to contact us at LCMS RSTM. We'd be glad to help out. God's blessings to you all.